The stars above New Cairo burned bright, casting a silver glow over the sprawling desert city. Hovercraft zipped through the air in silent streams, their lights blinking like fireflies against the neon skyline. Somewhere beneath them, deep in the underbelly of the city, a lone figure sat hunched in a dimly lit cafe, nursing a cup of something thick, bitter, and questionably legal on most civilized worlds. It had started as a joke. Humans, the unkillable species. The galactic equivalent of cockroaches. The only sentients who could stumble into a war zone, make friends with both sides, and leave richer than when they arrived. The running joke of the cosmos: you can try to kill a human, but good luck making it stick. Nobody laughed anymore. Captain Ilian Vorsk, a blue-skinned, three-eyed Mercani with a permanent scowl etched into his chiseled face, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Across from him, looking infuriatingly at ease, sat James Jim Foster, a human in a worn-out leather jacket, his boots propped on the table. Jim was grinning, the kind of grin that made Vorsk want to strangle something. Preferably him. Tell me again why I'm risking my career, my crew, and quite possibly my life to smuggle you out of here. Vorsk growled, his 3 fingers tightening around the ceramic cup in his hand. Jim stretched, his grin widening. Because, my friend, every bounty hunter, assassin, and intergalactic boogeyman in the quadrant is after me. And you know what happens to people who try to kill me? Vorsk sighed. They die. Messily. Exactly. Jim leaned in, lowering his voice. Now, normally, I'd be flattered. I mean, who wouldn't want an entire network of killers dedicated to their personal destruction? But this time, it's different. There's a hit out for me from the Syndicate. And when the Syndicate wants you dead, you stay dead. Except. Vorsk rolled his eyes. Except you're human. And that apparently makes you some kind of cosmic anomaly. Jim snapped his fingers. Bingo. The Mercani captain groaned, rubbing his temples. Why am I even listening to this? Jim's grin faded just slightly, and he glanced over his shoulder. The cafe was mostly empty, save for a lone bartender polishing glasses, and a hooded figure at the far end of the room who had been nursing the same drink for the last 30 minutes. Jim turned back to Vorsk, his voice low. Because this time, they're getting desperate. They're not just sending assassins after me anymore. They're sending something *L star. And I need to know what. Vorsk stared at him. Something else? Jim nodded. And whatever it is, it doesn't play by the same rules. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the silence between them, punctuated by the distant wail of sirens. Finally, Vorsk exhaled through his nostrils, leaning back. Fine. But if this gets me killed, I'm haunting you. Jim grinned again. Wouldn't be the first ghost I've had to deal with. The hooded figure at the end of the bar stood, moving toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. As they passed under the neon light, their hood slipped just slightly, revealing an angular, obsidian-black face, segmented like an insect's carapace. Their eyes, dark and depthless, locked onto Jim's for just a moment before they vanished into the night. Jim sat up straighter. Well, that's new. Vorsk followed his gaze. Friend of yours? Nope. And that's what worries me. Jim Foster had survived more assassination attempts than he could count. Poison. He had built up immunity to most known toxins. Blades. He had an uncanny ability to trip at exactly the right moment. Bullets. Somehow, they always seemed to miss. And the few times someone actually landed a killing blow, well, he just kept getting back up. The universe didn't make sense when it came to Jim Foster. And that was a problem for people who liked things predictable, people like the Syndicate. Vorsk finished his drink in one long gulp. I have a bad feeling about this. Welcome to my life, Jim muttered. He stood, throwing a few credits on the table. Come on. We need to move before our friend out there decides to bring company. As they stepped out into the street, the air smelled of spice and engine fumes. Neon signs flickered in alien languages, advertising everything from illicit tech enhancements to deep space charter flights. The city pulsed around them, alive and hungry. Vorsk adjusted his coat. Where to? Jim checked the small holo display on his wrist, his expression turning grim. The one place no assassin in their right mind would follow us. Vorsk frowned. And where's that? Jim looked up, his grin returning. A human bar. Vorsk groaned. Fantastic. I can already smell the questionable life choices. They moved quickly, weaving through the crowd. Somewhere behind them, something dark shifted in the alleyway, watching, waiting. And for the first time in his life, Jim Foster had the distinct feeling that he wasn't the strangest thing in the room anymore. The neon hum of New Cairo's nightlife faded behind them as Jim Foster and Captain Ilian Vorsk slipped into the dimly lit back alleys. The human bar Jim had spoken of was several blocks away, nestled in the heart of an entertainment district that no self-respecting assassin would dare step foot into. But the unease from earlier still gnawed at the back of Jim's mind. He had survived countless attempts on his life before, but this time felt different. As they moved, Vorsk stole a glance over his shoulder. You really think a human bar is enough to keep them off us? Jim smirked. Not just any human bar. It's run by a guy named Big Eddie. Ex-military, some black ops stuff he never talks about. If an assassin so much as breathes wrong in his place, they don't walk out. Vorsk exhaled heavily. That's assuming they care about self-preservation. Whoever's after you tonight might not be the usual brand of stupid. Jim didn't respond. He was thinking about the hooded figure from the cafe, the way it had moved, how its gaze had lingered a little too long. Assassins had an energy about them, a weight to their steps that belied their lethal intent. This one. It was like looking into a black hole. Something about it felt wrong. They turned the corner into the street that led to Eddie's bar. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just another watering hole squeezed between a cybernetics chop shop and an off-brand porn exchange. But as soon as the heavy steel door hissed open, the atmosphere inside told a different story. The moment Jim and Vorsk stepped through, heads turned. Humans of all shapes and sizes occupied the bar, some mercenaries, others spacers, a few with scars that told stories more vivid than any words could. Jim spotted Eddie behind the counter, a mountain of a man with cybernetic arms and a scowl deep enough to bury secrets in. He was cleaning a glass with a rag that looked like it had been through more battles than the entire Mercani Navy. Jim led Vorsk toward the counter. Eddie looked up, his expression hardening. Foster. Last time you were here, you cost me 6 tables, 2 walls, and a refrigeration unit. Jim grinned. And I tipped well. Eddie didn't smile. He never did. Instead, he placed the glass down and folded his massive arms. What kind of trouble are you bringing this time? Before Jim could answer, the steel door slid open again. The bar fell silent. The hooded figure from earlier stood in the entrance, its posture unnervingly still. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, as if sensing the shift in the air, Eddie reached under the counter. The distinct hum of an energy weapon charging filled the silence. Jim tensed. Eddie, you're going to want to keep that thing ready. The figure took a step forward, and the hood slipped slightly, revealing its insect-like face, obsidian black with deep, bottomless eyes. The moment those eyes locked onto Jim, the entire bar seemed to exhale in one synchronized movement, hands shifting toward weapons, shoulders squaring. It spoke. You are an anomaly. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't anything Jim had ever heard. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like the very air carried it. Jim forced himself to keep his cool. Yeah, I get that a lot. What do you want? The figure tilted its head. To understand. Vorsk tensed beside him. Eddie's finger hovered over the trigger. The entire bar was ready to erupt in violence. And yet, Jim felt a different kind of unease creeping up his spine. This wasn't an assassin. This wasn't a syndicate killer. It was something worse. Jim took a slow step forward. Understand what ? The figure didn't blink. Why you do not die? The bar's silence became a tangible thing, pressing against Jim's chest. He had been expecting another syndicate assassin, another hired gun with a vendetta. This was something else entirely. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he had an answer. Jim Foster had been shot, stabbed, poisoned, and thrown out of a speeding hovercar at least once. But never, not once, had he been stared down by something that asterisk wanted asterisk to understand why he was still alive. The thing in the hood tilted its head again, black insectoid eyes locked onto Jim as if peeling away the layers of his existence. The bar remained silent, weapons at the ready, but nobody made a move. They were waiting for the first crack in the dam. Jim took a step forward. You've got questions. Maybe I've got answers. But I'll be damned if I stand here playing 20 questions without knowing what you are. The creature's mandibles shifted slightly, but it did not break eye contact. We have no name. We exist to correct anomalies. Vorsk muttered a curse under his breath. I hate it when the scary ones talk in riddles. Jim ignored him. Anomalies like me? Yes. The creature blinked once, slowly, like a machine adjusting focus. The Syndicate has long sought your destruction. They have failed. We were summoned. Eddie, still behind the bar, finally spoke up. Summoned by who? The figure barely acknowledged him. By necessity. Jim exhaled, his hand twitching at his side. This was different. This wasn't just an assassin following a bounty. It was something designed for him star. Well, if you're here to correct me, you're in for a long night. The figure raised a clawed hand. Jim's instinct screamed, but he didn't move. The bar did chairs scraping as patrons gripped their weapons. Eddie's hand was under the counter, and Jim had a sinking suspicion a railgun was aimed directly at the thing's chest. Jim smirked. You've got two choices. You can start swinging, and we turn you into yesterday's trash, or you can tell me exactly what the hell you are and why I'm still breathing. The figure hesitated. Then, in a movement too fluid for something so alien, it sat down at an empty table. Jim blinked. That's new. The creature's mandibles shifted again. There are no records of humans who cannot die. We were tasked to solve the contradiction. Vorsk leaned toward Jim. You're gonna let this thing just sit down ? Jim shrugged, pulling up a chair opposite the creature. Might as well hear it out before we shoot it. Eddie snorted but kept his hand near the counter. The creature studied Jim for a long moment. Your survival defies probability. You should have died 72 times. Jim leaned back. 73, actually. There was that hovertrain incident last year. The creature didn't seem amused. Explain. Jim scratched his chin. See, here's the thing. Nobody really knows why humans are so hard to kill. You ever see a Terran survive a vacuum breach? I have. You ever see one get crushed by a falling structure and walk away with a headache? It happens. You think you're the first thing to try to put me down? I've had entire death cults dedicate their existence to making sure I stop existing. And yet, here I am. The creature's head tilted again. You do not understand it either. Jim's grin faded. No. And that scares me more than it probably should. The creature sat perfectly still, processing. You are a threat to probability. Jim scoffed. I'm a guy who's really bad at dying. Big deal. No. You are impossible. And the impossible must be resolved. The room tensed. Weapons were raised. The hum of a charged railgun under the counter filled the air. Jim sighed. You really gonna do this here? The creature's eyes darkened. There is no other way. Then it moved. Faster than anything Jim had ever seen, the creature lunged. A clawed hand went for his throat, but Jim twisted instinctively, knocking the arm aside. The table shattered between them. Gunfire erupted, plasma and bullets filling the room with deafening roars. Jim hit the ground, rolling out of the way as Eddie's railgun fired. The blast struck the creature, but instead of falling, it absorbed the impact, the glow of the energy dissipating across its carapace. Jim swore. Well, that's not fair. Vorsk fired next, but the creature moved again, twisting through the air like a shadow given form. A patron was thrown against the wall, the sheer force of the impact cracking the metal plating. Jim scrambled for cover. Eddie, tell me you've got something bigger back there. Eddie was already moving, pulling something massive from behind the counter. Plasma disintegration cannon. Hold it still. Jim groaned. Oh yeah, let me just ask it nicely star. The creature landed, crouched low, eyes locked on Jim. Then it spoke. "We will understand you." Then it lunged again. Jim didn't have time to think. The creature lunged, claws slicing through the air like razors. He twisted just enough to avoid being gutted, but the force of the attack sent him crashing into a table. The bar had become chaos, plasma bolts and gunfire illuminating the dim interior in staccato bursts of energy. Eddie fired the plasma disintegration cannon. The shot hit dead center, a direct impact powerful enough to vaporize a small vehicle. For a moment, silence followed. A smoldering crater now occupied the spot where the creature stood. Jim groaned, pushing himself up. "Is it?" Before he could finish, a clawed hand burst through the smoke. The creature still stood, slightly damaged but unshaken. It moved with a grace that defied physics, adapting to its wounds like a machine rewriting its own code. Jim grabbed a broken chair leg, the closest thing to a weapon within reach. "This is getting old fast." Vorsk, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, ducked beside him. "Got any more of that human luck?" Jim exhaled. "Only one way to find out." The creature turned to him, its dark eyes filled with something Jim hadn't seen before, curiosity. "You should be dead," it said, voice hollow and layered. "But you are not." Jim wiped blood from his mouth. "Yeah, people keep telling me that." The creature hesitated. A flicker of something, hesitation? Uncertainty? Jim took the chance. "You want to know why I don't die?" he asked, stepping forward. "It's because humans don't go down easy. We adapt. We learn. We take everything the universe throws at us and throw it right back." The creature tilted its head. "You are chaos." Jim smirked. "No. We're persistence." Eddie, now standing, raised his weapon. "Move." Jim stepped back just as Eddie fired again, this time, aiming for the overhead lighting. The supports shattered, and a massive industrial fixture came crashing down, pinning the creature beneath it. A pulse of energy coursed through its body, and it let out a sharp, alien screech. Vorsk exhaled. "Is it?" Jim didn't answer. He approached cautiously, watching the flickering remnants of the creature's form. It was still alive, but struggling. For the first time, it looked lost. Jim knelt beside it. "You don't get it, do you?" The creature's black eyes flickered. "Explain." Jim sighed. "You think everything fits into an equation. That life is predictable. But humans, we break every rule. You came here to correct me, but the truth is some things aren't meant to be solved." The creature twitched, then stilled. The glow in its eyes faded. Its body, once rigid, now seemed to dissolve into an ashen mist, dissipating into the air like a dying ember. Eddie grunted. "Well, that was unpleasant." Vorsk wiped sweat from his brow. "So, what now?" Jim stood, dusting himself off. "Now, we get a drink." Eddie chuckled. "On the house. After that mess, I think we all earned it." They gathered at the bar, bruised, battered, but victorious. As the chaos settled, Jim felt something shift inside him, not just relief, but understanding. Maybe he'd never know why he kept surviving. Maybe it didn't matter. Because at the end of the day, survival wasn't about being indestructible. It was about never giving up. And that was something no assassin, no algorithm, no cosmic force could ever predict. Jim raised his glass. To persistence. Vorsk clinked his glass against Jim's. To the anomaly. Eddie smirked. To one hell of a night. As they drank, the neon lights of New Cairo burned bright outside, casting their glow on a world that, against all odds, kept on spinning.